In this part of the series, we're going to do a little configuration just to set up our database connection and also our email as well, so we can actually send emails from our application. So by the end of this video, what we're going to have achieved is the ability to extract information from our database and also the ability to send an email, and we'll be checking that this works as well. So let's go ahead and bring up our config files for Laravel and actually start to change some of the settings here. Now all of the config files are stored within this config folder within app, and the first thing that we want to look at is the database. So here are all of the database settings. You can see that it's using PDO, so we know that it works with a variety of different drivers. In my case, I'm working with MySQL, so all I need to do is change the settings in this block here to relate to the settings for my server. Now my database is not called database, it's called auth, so that's the first thing I'm going to need to change. And for the username, that's fine, my username is root, and password, that's fine. I don't have a password for this root account on my local machine. So that is actually the database connection set up okay, but of course your details might be different and you might be eager just to check if this has worked or not. So that's fine, we can go ahead and do that. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be writing a bit of code within this home controller, so when we hit the home page of our application, we'll be able to maybe print R or just output something to do with a database record, and this will just make sure that we know that we have a valid connection to our database and it works, so we can go ahead and continue with the rest of the application. So what we're going to go ahead and do is insert a sort of fake record in here just for example purposes. So I've gone ahead and hit the insert tab in PHP I'm going to fill out the email and the username, nothing else, and just hit go. We'll get a couple of errors, but don't worry for that about that for now. So browsing, we can see that the ID of 2 here for Alex has been created, and we can go ahead and access this record by this ID, by this email, or by this username. So in here I'm going to go ahead and create a new variable. So this is all just PHP code, standard PHP code, and I'm going to use the user model to find a particular record, and that's going to be record 2. That's by ID. Now we'll take a quick diversion and look at how this works and why this works, and we'll go ahead and we'll start to examine models here and look at user. So the models are part of the MVC pattern. We spoke earlier about routing to controllers and views, but we didn't look at models. So models are basically, in Laravel's case, usually just a database connection to a specific table, and a lot of this has already been filled in for us because we can utilize a lot of this functionality, particularly for things like the password reminder stuff, which we won't be using, we'll be building our own. But what we're going to do here is just have a little look at this user model and see what happens, see what's sort of going on here. So we've got a class of user. Remember when we created our database table users, we also spoke about the fact that we're going to have a class called user, which is going to access the plural table. So without defining, well, we have defined it here, but we didn't need to define this. Without defining this here, this will automatically look for our users table. If, for example, your database table was called people, you would choose this in here. So this is where you would define your table. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use or what we've already done is use the find method, and that's part of the Eloquent Object Relational Mapper, or ORM for short. And basically what this is it allows us to access the database in a sort of object way that allows us to sort of pull in a user as an object and access related models, and we can relate models to each other using models, and it's very easy to use in terms of actually getting the information you want out of your database. So we're going to go ahead and use user, find, and user here relates to this model here. So any model that you create in here and anything that you extend from Eloquent will have these static methods like find or where, and we'll be examining some of them a bit later. So user find2 is going to go ahead and bring in the user details from the users table. Let's go ahead and get rid of this, from the users table at record 2. So let's go ahead and do a print R on user, and we'll examine this. And what I'm also going to do is echo out some pre-tags around it just so we get a better view of this. So within here, that's just going to output that at the very top of the page. So obviously this is temporary, we'll go ahead and get rid of it. So you can see here that we've got a user object that's been returned via this find method, this static find method. And you can, if you sort of work your way down, you can see that we've already got these fields output that we have within our database table. So we now have confirmed that we are able to access this information via Eloquent and via our user model. Now, just sort of out of interest, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just access the property username from this, and we'll go ahead and just echo this as well, and you'll see that that will just simply output Alex. So if we refresh, that goes ahead and outputs Alex. So this is how we will to some extent access our information from our database. We only have one table, so we're only ever going to be working with one model here, but in this case you can see from this table we've got a variety of different properties here, and we'll be slightly modifying this a bit later when we do things like creating user accounts and things like that. But now that we know that we can access our database, we can rest assured that we can use this in the future. But what about sending email? Well, what we're going to do now is go ahead and set up our mail.php config. So we'll be setting up this information, and what we'll also then do is go ahead and actually send a test email and check it in my email client to see if the email has been sent or not. So let's start filling out this information, and what you're going to need for this is an SMTP or a service that allows you to use SMTP. So this might be your own server, but it might be something like Gmail, which I'm going to be using. So if you do use Gmail, you can follow the same settings as I do, and this will automatically work for you. Otherwise, go ahead and check your email provider's SMTP settings. Ideally, what you'd want to do is you would want to use another service, so like a specific email sending service, a transactional email sending service, if this was going to go live. But for now, for testing purposes, I'm just going to use my Gmail account. It's so much easier. And you can see here that we've got different support for mail functions, or rather PHP's mail function, send mail as well, and SMTP, which is what we're going to be using. So these are the settings as follows. We've got the driver as SMTP. The host is going to be smtp.gmail.com, so fairly straightforward. The port is going to change here. That's going to be 465. And we need to set a few bits of information like the from address and the name. So the address in this case, I'm just going to do it from myself. It doesn't really matter what we enter here, to be honest. And in terms of the name, I'm just going to call this auth. So when we do receive emails from our application, this will be from the name auth. So that you can change this to whatever you want it to. The encryption is going to be SSL, that's required. The username is just going to be your email address, so alex@phpacademy.org, which is my email address. And then the password is literally just the password of your email that you would usually use to log in. So I'm going to go ahead and enter this now. Okay, so I've entered my password into here. Everything's done now. We don't need to do anything else in here. So what we can do is we can go ahead and close this off, and we can now go over to our home controller, and much like we did when we were testing our database functionality, we can go ahead and test our mail functionality. Now one of the first things I'm going to do just before we do this is go ahead and actually create an example view, because what we do is with the mail functionality in Laravel, we pass a view's contents to the email, and that will send email as a view. So all of our views are just basically what's shown to a user, whether that be on a web page or within an email. So in views, you can see that we've automatically got this emails emails folder here with auth and reminder. This is just a sort of example email they've bundled with it. I'm going to go ahead and delete this because I don't need it. So within the auth folder, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file called test, and I'm going to call it test.blade.php because we will include some blade outputting in here. And let's go ahead and get rid of that as well. So we'll close the user model as well. So here we're going to go ahead and actually create this mail functionality. So we use the mail model, and we use the static send method, and this takes a few parameters. The first one is the view that you want to actually output within the email, and in this case it's emails dot auth.test, because we've created this test file here. So it's emails.auth.test, and we then want to pass a array of variables that we may want to use within this view. So in this case I'm just going to say array name Alex, for example. So the next is a closure, and this takes one parameter, so we put that down there, which is message. And within here what we can do is we can say message to, and we can define the basically who we want to send it to and their name. So in this case it's just going to be alex@phpacademy.org, and in this case I'll just put Alex Garrett, and then we then pass subject, which is obviously going to be the subject of the email, so I'll just write test email, and that's it. That's the mail functionality. This takes into account the settings that we just created, and this should send the test email. So let's go ahead and go over to our browser and hit refresh on here. You'll see now that we just get the standard nav and the home message here. Over to my inbox, and let's check. There we are. We have a test email from me, and that's purely for the fact that I entered the from address as myself. So when I go ahead and click on test email, you can see that we get nothing in here at the moment. So at least we know the email worked. Now, because we're working with views, what we can actually do is we can go ahead and we can modify the view, so in test.blade.php, and output things that we want. Now, what happens if we want to access details about a specific user? For example, this array sort of name that I've passed in here. Well, we can do that. That's absolutely fine, no problem at all. We can go ahead and just output this name as a variable. This name index here, or this name key here in this array, will now be a variable within our view. So if I go hello name, so name being this, that will then say hello Alex. So let's go ahead and test it again. Head over to my email client, and there we go, we have hello Alex. So we now know that emails work. We've set up our email config and our database config. We've checked that both of them work, and we're ready to go ahead and send emails and access our database.